I am now pleased to introduce our host for today's discussion. Mr. Michael Miller, a member of the class of 1980, is the Chief Executive Officer and partner at Midstream Power, and as co-chair of the Rensselaer Texas Triangle Executive Council, has been instrumental in developing the concept and reality of the council's first panel that you are about to see. Welcome, Mr. Miller.
Thank you. As co-chair of the Rensselaer Texas Executive Triangle Council, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to our inaugural event. More than 300 of you have registered, which is tremendously exciting for us as a council. Thank you all for coming. I'm thrilled to recognize Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson, president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, who is joining us today as an attendee. We're also pleased to welcome 3 members of the Rensselaer Board of Trustees. Mr. Roy Davis, class of 1978, and co-chair of the Rensselaer Greater New York Executive Council. Ms. Kate Murtaugh of the class of 1987 and chair of the New England Executive Council. And Mr. Curtis Priem of the class of 1982, secretary of the Board of Trustees, parent of Gabriel, a member of the class of 2022, and of course, namesake of the Curtis R. Priem Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center, or the MPAC. We also give a warm Texas welcome to Matt Aguiar of the class of 1978, who is a member of the Rensselaer Texas Executive Council. Before proceeding into today's topic, I want to briefly introduce the Executive Council, its mission and goals. The Rensselaer Texas Executive Council is newly established, joining 4 other councils that have been previously established in areas with significant numbers of Rensselaer alumni, and parents. Those include the Silicon Valley, Greater New York, New England, and the Capital Region of New York. The executive councils have been created to strengthen the alumni, and parent network and offer opportunities for closer engagement with the university and each other. The Rensselaer Texas Triangle Executive Council proudly represents the more than 3,500 alumni, and parents that call the Lone Star State their home. Our Executive Council's mission is to support the university and our Texas regional network in 3 broad areas. First, we act as brand ambassadors for the university by hosting thought leadership networking events like this one that showcase both alumni and institute leadership and offer an opportunity to liaise with alumni who can serve as regional and corporate ambassadors and promote the Rensselaer brand at our places of business and in the community at large. The second is to support recruitment, placement, and partnership opportunities for the Arch. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Arch is a program that integrates a semester of work internships into each student's 4-year curriculum. Finding and developing relationships with employers who can provide Arch semester work opportunities is a critical part of the Council's mission. This is an area where help, referrals, and introductions to potential Arch employers and employment opportunities, which need to come from our alumni and our current student network, is critical for the Executive Council to support its goals. Given the nationwide rollout of vaccinations, we're all hopeful that more opportunities will open up given the return to more normal activity over the next few months. In addition to Arch opportunities, we also support recruitment of RPI graduates as well as promote the university for prospective and incoming recruitment purposes. And finally, we participate in and support philanthropy to Rensselaer. A big part of our mission is to expand the size and scope of the council by recruiting new members who are willing to pledge a level of philanthropic support to the university. We're here to support Rensselaer in its transformative capital campaign and 3 key initiatives, including Bridging the Gap, Faculty 500, and the 3rd Century Campus. For anyone interested in learning more about the council, possibly joining, or in helping in any of these areas, especially in expanding the opportunities for Arch and full-time recruitment in Texas, please visit the website and contact Drew Babbitts, Senior Advancement Officer at Rensselaer. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my commercial. Now let's get into today's topic, the future of the electric grid, optimize solutions for enhanced production, which is very timely as energy continues to play a major role in our daily lives, especially during this move to virtual environments many of us have faced in the past year. As well as the electrical issues experienced in California during the summer of 2020, and more recently, the major electrical outage experienced here in Texas just a few weeks ago. As the sources of energy generation increase, along with storage and distribution options, the question of how to best maintain and balance the grid becomes more and more significant. I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Dr. Keith Moo-Young of the classes of 1992 and 1995, who is the Vice Chairman of the Rensselaer Executive Triangle Council and Vice Provost and Dean of the Undergraduate Education at Rensselaer. Welcome, Dr. Moo-Young.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm pleased to moderate today's conversation, and I'm joined today by three esteemed panelists. First, Marianne Berlinski of the class of 1996, who is a member of the Rensselaer the Rensselaer Triangle Executive Council and president of EDF Energy North America, the world's largest utility and producer of electricity. Dr. Nikhil Koratkar, the John A. Clark and Edward T. Corson Chair and Professor, and at the center of the Future Energy Systems at Rensselaer. And last but not least, Dr. Jang Sun, who is Professor and Director of the Center for Future Energy Systems at Rensselaer. I welcome each of you to the panel and thank you for joining us today. We'll start the conversation by asking each of you to give us a brief background of your work and your research in relationship to today's topic, and the topic, the energy generation and transition of the electric grid. So let me first start off by asking you, Dr. Sun, you lead the Center for Future Energy Systems at Rensselaer. How does its research support energy transition?
Center, and it's funded by the New York State government financially. And we are currently in the second 10-year funding cycle of the support by the state. From the very beginning of the center, inception in 2007, the mission of the center has been to support the development of a future energy system that is sustainable, resilient, and economical. Initially, our goal was to grow electricity generation from renewable sources by reducing cost and removing barriers for system application of renewables. As renewable generation becomes more and more cost competitive, our focus has also moved to technologies that will enable a future grid powered 100% by renewables. And this has been our vision and understanding of energy transition, so the topic we discussed today. So to achieve this vision, CFAS works with the faculty members across the entire campus and collaborates closely with industry. More than half of our funding received from the state is devoted to supporting faculty collaboration with industry. So working with industry is very much the focus of our research. The project, the research we have funded ranges from new photovoltaics and wind turbine designs to operation control of future grids with 100% renewables, as well as different energy storage technologies that supports the energy transition. And this includes the work that Professor Koratkar does on the battery side. The center also has a dedicated staff that supports business development, business administration, outreach activities of center faculty. So that's, in short, supporting energy transition is all we do at CFAS.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sun. I'd like to move to Dr. Koratkar. Can you speak briefly about your background, research interest, and the research that you do in battery technologies.
Yes, thank you. I joined RPI in 2001, and my core expertise were in the synthesis of various types of nanoscale structures. Now, that was a very opportune time for me to join RPI because around the 2000 timeframe, RPI got a $50 million center from NSF, which was focused on nano. And there was just a lot of activity and a lot of excitement in the nano area. And so I did a lot of synthesis of these structures, and then I studied their fundamental properties. So I looked into their mechanical, thermal, electrical, optical properties, and so on. It turns out that at nanoscale, you get some very exotic properties, and we were able to discover a lot of new science. We were able to write a lot of high-impact publications in Nature and Science and so on. Around 2010 onwards, I realized that in order to remain relevant and in order to make impact, I need to start finding applications of these nanomaterials. It's not enough to just make nanomaterials and study their properties. It's also important to show applications. So the last decade, I've been looking at a diverse range of applications of nanomaterials, ranging from composites, coatings, sensors. But the one area where I think we've had the maximum impact has been in the area of batteries. So we've shown that nanomaterials can make batteries perform a lot better in terms of fast charging. And the main reason for that is that, when you go down to nanoscale, the distances over which lithium ions need to diffuse are now much lower. So microparticles might take a long time to charge, but nanoparticles can be charged at very high rate. So fast charging is something that you can accomplish when you go down to nanoscale. We also found that nanoparticles are mechanically very robust. So when you insert and extract lithium into a microparticle, you create large volume changes, which causes stress buildup. And these particles can break apart. But when you go down to nanoscale, if the size of the particle is smaller than the critical crack size, then we found that nanoparticles can be cycled and there is no risk or danger of fracture. So in terms of cycle life, you can make batteries last much longer by going down to nanoscale. So these are the two main advantages. So again, we've had a lot of impact in the battery space in the last 10 years. So that's my main focus area right now.
Great. I want to move now to Ms. Berlinski. Can you speak briefly about your background, the work you do in energy management, optimization in relationship to the electric grid?
Sure, thank you, and thanks for having me here today. So EDF is Electricité de France in North America. Our business model is really threefold. First, we buy energy directly from producers, whether that's at the wellhead from a natural gas supplier or from a power station that is generating electricity. We have a retail business where we sell electricity and natural gas to the largest consumers on the power and gas grids. And we have a trading and optimization business that encompasses all of that for helping with geographic arbitrage, time arbitrage, product crossover. So in North America, our business unit, we dispatch just shy of 100 power stations across the U.S. About half of those are in the state of Texas. When we look at the types of assets that we dispatch here, so we don't own the power stations. We help the owners schedule, hedge, and dispatch their assets. And with the largest consumers, we help them procure their energy supply, whether that's gas or power, and then help with demand response. So we're the largest provider of demand response into the ERCOT grid. So, I think from a unique perspective, certainly across this energy transition, we don't own the power stations, we don't own the manufacturing sites, but we do help all of those megawatts and MMBTUs get from where they're created to where they're consumed. So it has been a very interesting 20 years or so. My first job out of RPI was with Exxon. I spent 5 years in Baytown at the olefins plant. got my MBA, and then took a job with a company called Dynegy, where they handed me a power plant, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was right before the markets deregulated, and so I've been able to see regulated markets, deregulated markets, zonal markets moving to nodal markets, and so the energy transition is very real. We've seen it firsthand, and continues to create some challenges for us as an industry.
Thank you. Now, building on your background and experience, I'd like for you to kind of give us your perspective as it pertains to the recent electric power crisis in Texas. Can you talk about what happened and what were your experiences?
Absolutely. I mean, I had a courtside seat. Ultimately, it was an extreme weather event. Think Category 5 hurricane, and to be brutally honest, Texas was not prepared. When we look at, as an industry, when we look at planning around winter and summer storms and events, ERCOT used the winter of 2011 as its worst case scenario. And when you look at this storm that happened in February, it was much worse than the 2011 storm. It went farther south. It was colder in the metropolitan areas, and it lasted several days longer than the initial estimate. So I would say, first and foremost, we need to be better prepared for extreme weather events. We are seeing with climate change more extreme weather happening across the world. There was clearly in Texas a lack of coordination between our natural gas and our power regulatory bodies and infrastructure. Over the last couple decades, a lot of our natural gas compressors on our pipelines have been converted to electric in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to be more green. The unintended consequence of that is when there were rolling brownouts, we exacerbated the problem because we couldn't get the natural gas to the gas-fired power stations that desperately needed it. And then, third, I think, root cause of what happened was a lack of winterization. In Texas, we build our power grids for extreme heat in the summer. And this prolonged cold, where it was an equal opportunity storm. We had a nuclear power plant trip. We had coal piles freeze that required, humans with shovels shoveling coal onto conveyor belts. We had natural gas compressors stations that went down or frozen at the wellhead. Wind farms were covered in ice, and our solar panels were covered in snow. So when you looked across, every technology or fuel type failed. And then we learned when we're in our highest alert phase, EA3, you can't charge batteries either. So the batteries that were providing some of that regulatory frequency response services couldn't perform because they weren't allowed to charge. So it really was, you hate to sound cliche and say a perfect storm, but the number of things that went wrong, it was across the entire spectrum, and probably could have largely been dealt with if we had better planning.
Thank you. Now that we've discussed the challenges that come from managing the electric distribution, let's move on to what's possible solutions there are for this current challenge, as well as the planning for the future. Given what happened in Texas, what is the future of the grid? And secondly, what are some of the challenges to the grid as it pertains to energy sources, energy technologies that enhance or disrupt the future of energy storage and delivery? Dr. Sun, I'll start with you.
Okay, so first of all, with regard to the what happened in Texas in February, I fully agree with Marianne about preparedness and investment in the infrastructure, because this power system, everything there has a lifetime, and we have to keep investing, improve it. Beyond financial investment. I think technology can also help, but we have to invest first. This is what we call grid resiliency, right? We have to prepare for these extreme weather conditions that come more and more often, and we have to prepare for that. So I don't think we have shortcuts, in terms of investment in the infrastructure. Now, weatherization of wind turbines is an important aspect, and it just happens that in January, we started a new research project with ERCOT, and the project has to do about stability of wind farms operating in the power grid. And that was before the incident. And because of the project and my prior work in the field, I paid close attention to reports about wind farm outage, because there were a lot of that. And one of the reasons I was reported for outage was the cold weather and the turbine got frozen and cannot operate. That was one of the reasons cited in the report. I'm not sure how much of the 18 gigawatts lost power wind generating capacity was caused by this reason. I didn't see the breakdown. But the problem of this weather condition is not certainly inherent to wind turbines, because we have wind turbines operating in much more severe and challenging environment, like in the North Seas and much colder climate, and they don't have this problem because they were weatherized for that kind of environment. And certainly, that's a solvable problem. We just have to prepare for that. On the other hand, we look at today's turbine design and system operating procedures, they place a limit on the percentage of electricity that can be put into the grid from renewable sources, because the renewable sources are treated differently from conventional generators, and operating procedure and practice sort of place a limit, such that in the event of outage of more conventional power plants, the operators may have to curtail or reduce the production from those renewable sources by a certain proportion. So just as you need more production from renewable sources, the grid cannot absorb it because conventional generators are getting off the line. I'm not sure if that's related to the incident in ERCOT, but that's certainly one of the interest area for our research in the collaboration with ERCOT. So hopefully with new research and technology, we can make the grid more resilient and be able to operate with larger and higher percentage of renewables towards the future, where we hope that the 100% electricity will come from renewable sources. So that's kind of my perspective from wind turbine renewable generation standpoint.
Thank you. Dr. Karatkar, could you take a shot at those questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think since my expertise is in the battery space, I'll just sort of comment on the role of batteries. So the reason why you need batteries in the grid of the future is because the supply and demand are not going to match up, right? So for example, if your energy is coming from wind or solar, you might get your peak supply at noontime, but the demand might be later on in the evening, like 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night. So what you need is batteries that would temporarily store this energy and then would supply them when you really need them, right? So for short-term storage, we're talking about 12 hours, 24 hours, that kind of time frame, the batteries make the most sense. And so I think we are going to have to develop batteries that are tailor-made for the grid, because existing batteries don't have all the attributes that you need right now. So this is an open area of research that we need to work on.
Thank you. Marianne, is there anything you could add from an industrial perspective on these questions?
Yeah, I was going to a slightly different tact is around the regulatory issues. Our power systems, our markets are really designed to have natural gas generation at the margin, meaning in Texas every day, all of the generation owners offer in all of the energy they can make at their marginal cost to make that next megawatt. And it sets the clearing price for everyone. And in ours, where you have the bulk of your generation coming from renewable assets, which have a marginal cost of zero because they don't have fuel, it's creating a very low price environment So the week of February 14th, notwithstanding, but when we have these markets that were really not, the mechanisms weren't designed to take into account a large portion of the energy coming from renewable sources with zero marginal costs, it does create an environment that is very difficult for us to have thermal generation continue to be paid and maintained and operated so that it's there when we need it. So I do think that as this market continues to evolve and we see more renewable type assets, we need mechanisms that allow the diversity of fuel supply to be taken into account. And to pile on to the battery comment, we need services where the batteries can get paid for the value that they bring. And again, if you look at how batteries are trying to get funded right now, it's by selling ancillary services or other capacity type products. But the buyers typically are looking, 1 to 3 years out, where you need a 10-year hedge to get to where the batteries have enough revenue certainty that they can, get the projects funded. So I do think we need to holistically look at how we value energy and how we create price transparency around those sources.
Thank you. Moving into a discussion on renewable energy. This first question is for Dr. Sun. What options are there to maintain stability when renewable sources are low? And secondly, are there options for enhancing the integration of wind turbines into the grid?
Yeah, so as Marianne said, we have to take a holistic approach to these, particularly when we move towards a future with more and more renewables. As we all know, maintaining stability of the grid is about balancing the production with consumption. So as we have more penetration by renewables, the variability of production certainly poses a significant challenge. We don't have all the pieces of the solution yet. We think about the future power grid with 100% renewable. It's a journey we just started recent years, but I can share a few points at this time, how we're going to deal with that in the future. So first of all, I think we have to build margins into the generating capacity. When renewables are expensive, we sort of try to minimize the capacity. But the power grid has always been designed to handle peak demand. And this kind of situation may only last a few hours a year, but we have to have the capacity there to support that. And we have to do the same and even more with renewable production, right? So that's something we have to keep in mind. It's not just about, we need 8 gigawatts, we build 8 gigawatts. We have to build much more than that. Second, we need to strengthen and expand the transmission network, the infrastructure that supports the electricity transmission and distribution. And this will allow electricity to be transferred across regions. It would help to average out the local variability of renewable. The U.S. is a big continent. And we cannot say that sun is always shining somewhere on the U.S., but certainly wind is always blowing somewhere. So we have a strong network that can transfer electricity across the regions. We have a better opportunity, a possibility to average out the variability, have a more stable production. And that also allows us to tap into renewable sources that may be more efficient to harvest, but far away from load centers, like in the west of Texas. So that's also important to support the future. Thirdly, we need to also find a way to manage the loads. In the traditional power system, we manage the production, but we don't manage the loads. With renewables, we have less ability to control the production. Therefore, the other side of the equation need to be looked more closely in order to balance the supply demand. There are a number of technologies that have been tested recent years. There's a lot of government programs, and I think this is going to be more and more important. Last but not least, we definitely need energy storage. In addition to batteries that Nikhil talked about, we also need storage in other forms that can last longer and possibly are more versatile. and not all necessarily in the form of electricity. For example, the European Union recently announced the so-called Green Hydrogen Initiative, and the program is to produce hydrogen using electricity produced from renewables, and then generate electricity from hydrogen when renewable production is low. So this provides more flexibility and make it possible to store energy in much longer term and also possibly transform in other forms. European Union has a goal to install 40 gigawatts electrolyzer by 2030. And I think we're going to see a lot of that in the US as well. So the combination of the number of these technologies should help us to manage the future grid with 100% or significant amount of renewables.
Thank you. Nikhil, can you speak to how batteries assist the managing intermittent energy supplies for renewables, and also the potential follow-up, perhaps, what is the status of battery manufacturing in the U.S., and does the new Made in the USA initiative offer an opportunity for the U.S. to enter the battery manufacturing industry as a major player?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think as Jian Soon mentioned that when you have a mismatch between your supply and demand, if it's something that you need to store long term, then batteries are not the best option. But if it's a short term storage issue where you need to store energy for a few hours, let's say half a day, that is really where batteries make the most sense. So we need a whole spectrum of ways to store energy to make sure that we can balance demand and supply. With respect to the issue of manufacturing, I think that most manufacturing of batteries has shifted to Asia, back in the 80s and 90s. So I think we as a country kind of dropped the ball in terms of not being able to hold on to our IP. A lot of the IP migrated to Asia, and the large scale manufacturing really happens in Asia. However, recently, I would say the last 5 years or so, there has been a trend for battery manufacturing to come back to the US, and that has been driven primarily by the car companies. So the auto companies, when they, for example, you have companies like Tesla, GM, and so on, what they find is that they would ideally like to co-locate their car manufacturing and the battery manufacturing at the same site. It does not make sense financially to build a car in America but have the battery made in China and then shipped over, right? So the car companies are really driving the return of the battery industry back to the US, right? And I think this gives us a lot of opportunities. Even though the car companies are now manufacturing batteries, there's still a risk because that underlying technology is still foreign. So for example, Tesla is making batteries that are made by Sony, Panasonic. GM is using batteries made by Samsung. So these are still not American homegrown concepts, right? So we're still dependent on a supply chain that is not inside the US. Batteries need cobalt. Cobalt is made only in Congo, is found only in Congo. That's a pretty unstable part of the world, right? Lithium, again, is found only in South America and small amounts in Australia. Graphite that you need in batteries, battery-grade graphite is solely manufactured in China alone. So the supply chain is all outside of the US. So you can think about this. If there is, like a world war or some kind of pandemic or something like that, it is possible that this battery supply chain breaks down, and then we won't be able to manufacture these batteries in the US. So I think it's very important, beyond just bringing these concepts back to the US, we need to try to disrupt the supply chain. We need to come up with concepts that are different, that are invented here in the US, and we need to implement them here in the US. So for example, in my lab, we are looking at batteries that do not use graphite, that do not use cobalt, that are aqueous based. And these could be formulated such that the entire supply chain is based in North America and South America. And that gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom to make batteries here in the US. I also think that, with batteries, we have a unique opportunity in terms of the fact that the cost of the battery is not driven by labor costs. Because if anything is driven by labor costs, the US can never compete with Asia, right? But batteries are different. The majority of the cost comes from the cost of equipment, the cost of cobalt, lithium, and that really drives the cost. So I think because of this reason, I think it is feasible economically to do battery manufacturing here in the US, and that's something that I think we can all rally around as a nation, right? So even if you're in a blue state like New York or you're in a red state like Texas, I think we can all agree that in a post-COVID world, where a product that is critical to our well-being is something that we should be making here in the US, and I think we can all. That is something that I think makes a lot of sense to most people, and I think there's a real opportunity to make batteries here in the US.
Thank you. Marianne, the pace of energy transition has increased in recent years, especially in Texas with the dramatic integration of renewable resources. What are some of the trends you're seeing across the industry?
Well, I think the trend is who's driving this fast pace of change. When I look back 10, 15 years ago, we did have green energy products available to sell to customers, but very few people wanted to pay extra to have their power be green. A decade ago, we saw the tech companies really start driving corporate PPAs or power purchase agreements coming, so where they could see through back to where's their energy being generated and how is it get from the generation source to the grid and then to them in their retail agreements. It was really the big tech companies that started that trend. And what we're seeing now is it's not just Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook who are doing 100% renewable supply agreements. It's hospitals and universities. We're starting to see regional manufacturing. We're seeing car manufacturers, which traditionally, it was always low price, to no, it's got to be low price and I need it greened up. So I think the trend, again, starting with the tech companies moving to corporate, and now it's shareholders, investment funds, banks don't want to bank companies unless they can show that their energy supply and how sustainable are their operations. So it really is becoming a very cultural response to energy and having transparency in not just how you're consuming your energy, but how all of your supply chain partners are consuming theirs. So I do think that the big trend and the reason we've seen this just really fast pace of change is because customers are insisting on green power.
Thank you. Dr. Sun, this question relates to a similar one that came through registration. You've collaborated with industry internationally to address grid integration challenges related to the development of renewable energy in a large scale. What have been the experiences and lessons learned? And secondly, what are the new challenges and trends you see in other countries and regions?
So first of all, in general terms, I think one of the things I learned also, as Marianne mentioned, is the understanding that who is actually driving this transition. Because typically we think this is business, it's about cost, but no, at the end, it's not that. It's all the other forces. And when something like that happens, it happens faster than anyone can anticipate. That has happened internationally in many regions. So many times, technologists ourselves are kind of caught off the guard. We're not prepared in many cases. Now, technically, the community talked about many challenges, right? The balancing of production and the generation, one that everyone understands. But often, another lesson I learned is problems that everyone talks about, typically does not become a problem at the end, just because everyone knows about it and you start to pay attention to it, and everyone does a little bit towards it, and eventually the problem does not materialize. It dissolves by itself in a way. On the other hand, there are always surprises. And so we have to expect the unexpected. And that's kind of, what I try to do with our research in the systems area. And we try to foresee those kind of non-trivial, non-obvious challenges and prepare for that. And indeed, that's been kind of an interesting aspect of our research. So about 15 years ago, we started a research project to look into how to operate the future grid with a lot of renewable. So we got about $1 million from the state. We built a test bed because at that time, 15 years ago, you cannot talk to anyone about the future grid where you have 100% renewable. Nobody would believe that. And there's no place you can go to ask, what would be the problem. So we built a test bed in the lab, and we learned a great deal from that. And we developed a set of series tools to analyze the stability of that kind of system. And initially it was, looked like more like academic exercise. And people think maybe 30, 40 years into the future, we may need that. But no, it happened much faster. So around 2014, I received a lot of contacts from practical people, industry in Europe and elsewhere about practical incidents they run into. And they kind of found us from the publication papers they wrote. One interesting contact I had was we had this issue in our offshore platform, and the recording of the incident looked very much like what we published in our papers. It was kind of really exciting to be dragged into those kind of practical situations and be able to help industry solve the problems with the serial methods we develop. So that's kind of one important lesson we learned. We have to go beyond the obvious and really think about the not just the balancing of production and consumption, but also the more physical aspect of electrical integration. In terms of new trends, what we saw in the last few years is, again, this moves faster than any of us can anticipate. And all of a sudden, we see many countries and regions announcing the goal to achieve 100% renewable or complete carbon-free electricity system by 2040 or 2050. When we think about that's 20, 30 years away. I've been working at RPI for 20 years or close to 20 years, and that seemed to be just yesterday. And certainly that's going to be a very different power system. So we have to prepare for that. And I'm sure this is going to come faster than people have announced. And we have to rethink many of the aspects of the grid, how to design that to incorporate renewable and enable this energy transition. So there's a lot of things we learn, and it's kind of fascinating time to work in this field.
Thank you. The next question relates to Professor Koratkar. In thinking about integrating new design concepts, how can the electric grid be optimized to ensure more efficient energy conservation and storage?
Yeah, so I think in the past, what we've seen is that the grid has been very centralized. The trend in the future is that it's going to become more and more local. So you can think about, let's say, a town having sort of like a transfer station where you kind of bring in all the power and then send it out. You can go even more local and think about a neighborhood, like a bunch of houses have their own local grid. And if you take this to the extreme level, you can think of every home, individual home, has, let's say, battery pack in the basement and some kind of panels on the roof, right? So that is the extreme example where every home has its own individual localized grid. So I think this is the trend where things are moving down the road, and I think a more local model is going to be more efficient than the large centralized model we've had in the past.
Thank you. Marianne, what challenges need to be addressed to ensure long-term reliability and resiliency of the power grid?
Well, Dr. Sun touched on the resilience and how important it is with power, and very simply said, supply and demand have to be matched all of the time. System frequency in Texas needs to be 60 hertz. When it's not, things start going badly. And when I think back to that Valentine's Day week here in Texas, Friday morning, Friday the 19th, ERCOT, the system operator, brought us basically out of DEFCON 5. So we came out of emergency status, and I walked out of my office, walked over to our real-time desk where we dispatched the power stations, and the relief was palpable. You could, I had big country operators crying. We were so close to a full blackout in the state of Texas, 3 minutes from a total blackout. And I think as an industry, as we have got to come up with ways to ensure that the system is more resilient. Two, black start. People are surprised to hear power plants need electricity to start. In the state of Texas, we only have 13 power stations that can start from total blackout. They have to start a diesel motor, and they use that diesel motor to start the turbines. It's like a complex ballet to get the power grid back up and running. In best case scenario, ERCOT says 4 to 6 weeks before the entire state was re-energized, if that had happened. We were one power station tripping away from a total blackout that would have had Texans in the dark for 4 to 6 weeks. And the societal impact of something that catastrophic, and we were so close to it happening. I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time and reflection on what can we do better and how can we ensure as we go forward that this type of event could be managed and handled in a better way where we didn't have people dying. It really was just an unprecedented longest outage of affecting the most people in the history of the United States. So I do think it comes down to making sure that we have properly maintained power assets, that we understand the impacts of injecting a lot of renewable energy onto the grid, and then making sure our personnel, I will say that the operators, the folks who are dispatching those power stations and that kept the lights on, did an amazing job. And it's a ton of training and review, but there has to be a better answer if there is a blackout than 4 to 6 weeks. It should be no more than 4 days. And I think that's really the next big problem we should, as an industry, try to solve.
Thank you. Nikhil, how are batteries for the electric storage different from other applications, and what research is needed to develop batteries specifically for the grid?
Absolutely. I think that's a very important question. I think cost is one of the big differences. Like for grid storage, you need batteries that are very cheap. They need to be very safe. You can't have a case where the battery catches fire. You need very long cycle life. So these batteries need to last a long time. And also they need to be very compact. So from a volume point of view, they need to be very efficient. Weight is not that important, right? Because it's a stationary application. So they don't need to be super light, but they need to be very compact. And finally, they need to give you high power output, because when you need to supply the power, you need to do it at a high rate, right? So this is something that these 5 qualities are something that batteries are not fully optimized for. For example, lead acid batteries are very cheap, but they don't have enough cycle life. Lithium ion batteries are great, but they're too expensive, right? Flow batteries, there's been a lot of excitement in the area of flow batteries, but flow batteries are great in all aspects, except they're not very compact. So from that point of view, there's no one single battery that can meet all of these requirements. And so that really opens up this area of research for people like me to kind of step in and say, can we design a battery that's optimized specifically for the grid?
Thank you. Now, we're going to try to incorporate some of the questions that came through registration into the conversation we just had. But we will move on to any other questions that came through as we haven't addressed, and we'll try to cover as much as we can given the short time we have together. So I'll start by asking Jen, does the electric grid with its proposed upgrades have the capacity to supply the demand for the amount of electric vehicles predicted to be sold in the country?
Yeah, so I think the short answer is yes. If we just talk about electricity requirement for the EVs, the short answer is yes. But to be convincing, we need to do a little bit of math. So we look at the EVs on the market today. They typically consume somewhere between 25 to 30 kilowatt hours of electricity for every 100 miles you drive. So that's typical for a passenger car. Now, so we say each family owns an electrical vehicle, and you drive 1,000 miles a month, so which average out to be 30,000 miles a day. So I think it's representative. They do the math, that basically translates into 250 to 300 kilowatt hours more electricity usage per household per month. So that's one number, right? So if everyone owns EV, every family owns an EV, we're going to see that 250 to 300 kilowatt hour electricity increase per family per month. Now, to put that number in perspective, the average electricity consumption per household in the US was close to 900 kilowatt hours per month. So you put 250 to 300 on top of 900, it's about 30% increase of electricity usage, but only in the residential sector. Now, the residential sector accounts for roughly one third of electricity consumption in the US. You take 30% divided by 1 out of 3, basically works out to be about 10% increase in electricity usage nationwide on average. If you look at number, 10% increase, it's not a huge number. And certainly we have a long time, enough time to build up the capacity in generating transmission distribution to fill any gap. But this is not going to happen overnight, right? So the short answer is, again, yes, I think the system can handle that. Maybe some hot spots in certain areas that need to be enhanced. Now, this calculation does not consider the actual usage time or charging time, because electricity on average per month doesn't mean much if you don't think about the when it's needed. So in the extreme scenario, when everyone comes home around 5, 6 p.m. and they all plug the car and start to charge, in the meantime, everyone's cooking and turning on the TVs, that can add a lot of stress to the system. Right? But it doesn't have to happen that way. You don't have to charge the car right away. You can wait until early in the morning, charge it. So it's a challenge that can be managed. So I think the electrical vehicle itself will not put a lot of new demand on how we build the grid. It's other things that will drive the transition.
Next question. Marianne, what are the top 3 things that need to be done to prevent another outage like the Texas experience?
Planning. No, we need to do a better job of planning around our severe winter and summer events. I think we need to get our natural gas and our power infrastructure more tightly coordinated. That clearly was a lessons learned from the February event. And winterization. I mean, mentioned earlier, there are wind turbines in the North Sea. Texas is not nearly that brutal. It's just our wind turbines weren't winterized, and neither were our solar panels and our gas infrastructure. So planning, gas power coordination, and winterization.
Thank you. Next question. This is for Professor Sun and Koratkar. Either of you can take this one. Marianne, you could also chime in on this. Is nuclear energy the most practical solution to increase energy demand? and limit greenhouse gases. What's the role of nuclear power in the future of our energy system?
I'm happy. I'm happy to start. EDF is the largest nuclear operator globally, so we do have a lot of experience building, owning, and operating nuclear energy production. I think that the issue with new build nuclear is in deregulated markets, it's difficult to fund it. But there are places in the world, India, in the United Kingdom, where we are seeing successful new build of nuclear assets.
So maybe I can just share my personal kind of feeling about it, because it's not my research area. I think technically we are all confident that this is safe, but there's a very important human factor in all of that, and because if we think about it, I'm fully supportive of that. But I'm thinking, okay, someone is building a nuclear power plant 50 miles from my home. I kind of see that my reaction will be very different. And I think that's probably more important than, technologies that we talk about. It's hard to tell, how it's going to move in the future. It's knowing what happens in Germany, for example, in the last 20 years.
Okay. So a quick follow-on to that. Natural gas is it's been called the bridging fuel. Are renewables plus storage really viable to completely replace all other generations in the time frame over the next 20 to 30 years? Dr. Sun?
Yeah, I think, technically, I think it's really feasible. We renewable production, storage, and coupled with demand response, manage the loads and enhance infrastructure to connect the different regions better. I think we can operate a future grid with 100% renewable. On the other hand, obviously the social aspect, the costs need to be carefully considered. And how do we take the system from today, where it is today, to the future is a very important challenge. We're not rebuilding the system. We have to transit the system. And that's more difficult than rebuilding something totally new. In that process, I think natural gas certainly will play a very important role. And maybe the word bridge fuel is appropriate, because I think in one scenario would be that as we produce more electricity from renewable sources, we use gas power plants to provide more ancillary service. So instead of serving the base loads, we use them to more support the grid operation by using their ability to ramp up and down production quickly. Right? So when electricity production from renewables goes down, you can ramp up the production from gas power plants. So that will compensate for a lot of the variability. But that change requires changing the business model and a lot of the economic aspect of it.
Okay.
I think we should also recognize the other type of fuels, right? Not just the natural gas, because we talk about hydrogen, other type of fuels that we can produce from electricity can also play similar role in that transition. But technically, I think we can do that. Sorry.
Okay. So I'm gonna wrap up the round of questions with this last kind of combo question to you, Nikhil. Nanotechnology has definitely had some inherent safety hazards. What can be done to make sure that the nanotechnology used for battery storage is safe? And then how long, just a follow-on question, how long do batteries typically last, and what are plans? What happens when you need to either recycle or replace the batteries?
Yeah, so there is some literature that indicates that when the size of the nanoparticle goes down to the order of a few nanometers, we're talking very small nanostructures, quantum dots. In that case, these particles can be floating in the air, and they can enter your lungs, and they can even maybe pass through your skin and go straight into your bloodstream. Again, there's no broad agreement on that, but there are some reports that these kind of things can happen. However, in the battery space, we typically work with particles that are 50 to 100 nanometers in size. And so these are pretty safe, and there's no health issues that we've had to deal with in my lab. With regard to how long batteries last, for the grid, you need batteries that would last 10 to 20 years, right? So you need very long cycle life. And, this is, one area where lead acid is just not, it's just not going to last long enough. And so you need better batteries that are much more long lasting. With regard to recycling, recycling is done mostly in Asia. The US is just starting to enter that space. Recycling is typically not important if your battery is cheap, right? But if your battery is expensive, it uses cobalt and lithium, which is both expensive. That's when you really want to recycle it so that you can recover the cobalt and you can recover the lithium. That happens quite a lot in Asia, but it's just starting to take off here in the US. I think recycling also depends a lot on manufacturing. So if you manufacture the battery with the view to recycling it, then you do it in a different way. And I think battery manufacturers need to start thinking of the end of life recycling step right when they start the manufacturing process. So again, that's a different mindset that is starting to take over now.
Thank you very much. This brings us to an end of our time today. I thank everyone who was able to join us today as attendees, and to those who submitted questions. I would like to thank our panelists for an excellent, timely discussion on the issues that face everyone across the globe. The Texas Triangle Executive Council looks forward to hosting virtual events and in-person events once it is safe to do so. And I hope you will again join us.
Thank you to Dr. Moo-Young, our panelists, and attendees for joining us today. You will be receiving an email within the next few days with a link to today's recording, along with a brief survey asking for feedback to help us in planning for future virtual events. We are particularly interested in hearing what topics would be of interest to you, preferred timeframes, and other details that will be helpful as we plan. Thank you in advance for your input, and be sure to check your email moving forward for upcoming virtual events. Please also follow the Rensselaer Institute Advancement YouTube channel for all previous virtual event recordings. We hope you will be able to join us for a virtual reunion and homecoming from April 14th through 16th, celebrating classes ending in 0 and 5. All are welcome. The 3-day event will feature a presidential State of the Institute, Class Alive student panel, and a presidential Global Game Changers panel online. Watch your email and visit the website on screen for more details. Finally, now more than ever, support is needed to continue the exceptional tradition of a Rensselaer education for our incoming and current students. Please visit our website to learn how you can support Rensselaer students. Thank you, stay safe and healthy, and have a great rest of your day.